Welcome to Celtic State of Mind. I'm John Dykes, and today I'm joined by Jim Orr. Welcome back to the show, Jim.
Afternoon, Paul.
And we are going to be discussing more or less last night's performance, if you can call it a performance, lack of, Jim. Give me your view on that before we get into the nitty-gritty. Give me your view overall on last night's performance.
Overall, I think we picked a half-decent team. I think if the game had stopped maybe after 75 minutes, we'd have said it's another typical performance. If we'd have lost 2-1, we'd have said it was a poor performance and not much more than that. But losing 2 goals in the last 15 minutes has turned it into a kind of poor performance, to like total embarrassment. Where we go from here, I'm not that sure. But you can't be losing 4-1 to teams like Sparta Prague, particularly, they're not a particularly big team. Half of their players are missing. We're playing at home. You can lose 4-1 to AC Milan or PSG and these guys, but not at Sparta Prague. So it's usually disappointing. I've said in previous podcasts, I'm not that fussed about Europe. The main thing is it doesn't affect going for the 10, because if 99.9% of the fans think 10's the biggest thing, then I think Europe is getting in the way. It'll get in the way in terms of one of our players might pick up COVID, so hopefully that's not happened. Following last night, we don't know. Hopefully nobody's got injured from last night. We lost Big Aya last week through playing in Europe. If you look at the second goal we lost last night, if Aya's playing centre-half, we don't lose that goal, because I would have the pace to have beaten that guy. Big Nia, great player that he is, doesn't have the pace. You play a game in Europe on a Thursday night, you've got the fatigue for the Sunday. I thought after the Lille game, at half-time last week, we looked completely knackered. So that was a factor as well. So you get these 3 factors that are getting in the way. So in some ways, and you never want Celtic to lose, of course you don't, but I'd rather we went in Europe, and having suffered that defeat last night. Another thing about, I haven't really seen anywhere, the fact that Lille beat AC Milan. I mean, we could have won the game 5-0 last night, but the fact that Lille beat AC Milan meant the chances that I've got us qualified, even if they won the game last night, are still quite remote. But if you're going to play in Europe, then the other things you're looking for is some sort of half-decent performance. Didn't get that last night. Or half-decent result. Didn't get that last night either. So that's a concern. And then having listened to Neil Lennon after the match, I mean, he said a lot of very negative things about both the team and individual players. So I think there's a lot of work to be done between now and Sunday.
Now, the way that I view the aftermath of the match is as important as the poor performance itself, Jim. I mean, obviously, Neil Lennon has come out and he's given his press conference. He's given his club press conference. And I found a lot of the comments that he made very interesting indeed. Now, if we go back, for example, to the aftermath of the Ferencváros game, I was critical of Neil Lennon's comments after that game and the nature of the comments, because it was all on the players. That was the response to the Ferencváros defeat. You and I have had a discussion since then about that game, whereby I think what you offered was a very balanced view of the choices that Neil Lennon had to make before that game and how that didn't work out, and how I was blaming Neil Lennon solely for that, and you gave the players some of the flack for that.
Well, I think that was the game we had more than 20 attempts at goal. In any other game, if you have 20 attempts at goal, one would think you might score 2 or 3 goals, and then we make 2 individual mistakes at the back, and that costs us dear. So I think in that situation, plus we also thought the team was okay. So you add all them up, I thought it was hard to blame Neil Lennon. Hugely disappointing though it was to be knocked out of Europe, or knocked out of the Champions League. And any time Celtic lose, there's always going to be some sort of inquest. I think you have to analyse what's been happening. It's easy to have a knee-jerk reaction. I'm not saying this is a knee-jerk reaction after last night, because there's been a lot of disquiet this season. But I think when you look at in terms of putting points on the board, in terms of qualifying for last year's Scottish Cup final. Domestically, notwithstanding some poor performances, if I was Neil Lennon, I'd find it hard for anyone to say, I think I should be sacked. Because all we've done so far is, in the league, we've dropped points away from home twice, as have the league leaders, and then we've dropped 3 points to them when we'd half a team missing. And that's the difference at the moment. So I think we should panic. There's cause for concern, and obviously the comments Neil Lennon made after the game shows he's concerned. I still think it's up to Lenny to try and put it right. I get a bit frustrated with some of the players, and I said something last week about I think most fans will have a bunch of players you like and a bunch of players you don't like, and there's guys in the middle. And I said last night, Moy Elianusi does my head in, basically. He's a 1 and 2 guy. You know, you'll get a kind of 9 out of 10 performance, and you'll get 2 out of 10 performance. Whereas what you really need is like guys are giving you 7 out of 10 all the time. And given this season, and the old cliche that every point's a prisoner, you can't afford people to have a 2 out of 10 every second game. You can't do that. And I think we've got too many players like that. And I think that's what's infuriating Lenny. I mean, Lenny's not perfect. There's some things that he could have possibly done this year during games and hasn't done. One of the things I mentioned last week, I think having the 5 subs, you would think this is a unique opportunity to do something a bit different. Put on 2 subs at half time, no matter what. Because we look at the game last Sunday, and people tended to say, in general, that was a good performance. And what I tend to do is, if we have a good result, I tend to look at the negatives and then vice versa, so you don't get 2 up, 2 down, type of thing. But the first 10 minutes of the game last Sunday, I mean, they were very dangerous. It was a very unlike Aberdeen. They were going for it. They kind of fancied it, and they got a lot of joy down the left-hand side. And Bain was going mental at Frimpong. And if Sam Cosgrove was a bit sharper, a bit more match fit, he might have caused the damage in the first 10 minutes. But we go over the first 10 minutes, now we played well. 2-0, should have been more than 2-0. The thing I've mentioned before is, until you go 3 goals up, you're still in that endurance zone. You're enduring the game because you really need that third goal to make it safe. And I thought we were really disappointing in the second half. And I thought we should have made subs at half time. We should have brought a couple of people. Because people have seen things on social media that we managed the game really well the second half. That's not what I've seen. I've seen us not having the ball that much, not as much as we usually have. I saw us having to defend quite a lot. A few blocks by Frimpong and Duffy, so it wasn't comfortable. So it's only when you get into the last few minutes you think, well, I'm not going to come back now. But I didn't think that was game management. So there's things Lenny maybe could have done better, but I think if you're winning games, I think it's very hard to criticise the manager if you're winning games. If you don't win games, I think it's perfectly valid to ask a few questions as to maybe we should have done this and maybe we should have done that, because if you'd have done something different, it couldn't have been any worse than losing the game. And that's why I think if I was a manager and people said after a game that I'd won that I should have done something differently, I would say talk to the hand, we've won the game. I can't win the game more than I've won the game. But in games like last night, you have to ask questions. And Lenny knows that himself. And I think the question that most fans will have will be, is he the man to turn it round? Do you stick or do you twist?
Where do we go from here? That's a big question.
And I think the other thing about it's really easy to say, we don't want to stick, we want to twist. But the thing is, you don't know what you're going to twist to. So you're twisting blind. But
Jim, on that point, we might not know where they're going to twist to. However, the magnitude of that decision can't be made off the cuff. That's something that should have already been considered and may have already been considered. So you've got to think, well, have other managers already been approached in that respect? Now, here's the big thing for me, Jim. A few weeks ago, I gave my opinion on the situation we are discussing today. And some people thought it was the wrong opinion. Now, that's fine, because we can agree, we can disagree. You and I could talk for hours on end and disagree on a number of subjects, but I'm not going to fall out with you. But it was almost as if people were taking it personally. And I think what we're now seeing is an unravelling of that, because you're right, if they're continually winning, talk to the hand. We've won 1-6. 1-6. We've lost 3 games at home. It was reported last night for the first time in 30 years. we're in a downward trajectory now. Normally, if you'd said to me, can Neil Lennon turn this around, and it was just an issue of form or picking the wrong team or having the wrong shape, I think all of these things are fixable. I think form is a temporary thing. You know, you come back into form. I think the shape, you should learn from any errors that you have in terms of the way that you line your team up, and the same with the personnel. But my biggest concern, if you throw this into the mix, are the issues that we spoke about on the podcast before and were criticised for doing so in relation to somehow trying to suggest there were issues behind the scenes. Now, let's just look at the facts. Let's just look at even what Lenny was saying last night. So he gave a very short and very negative response last night. He was talking about a lack of hunger. He was talking about the performance being totally unacceptable and really poor. That's on the players. He said that twice. That's on the players. Not my responsibility. That's on the players. He spoke about, and we'll come back to this because this was massive for me, about a change of culture, about a sea change, and the fact that you would need to do it very quickly, which unfortunately isn't possible if you want to change a culture. He spoke about the performance being insipid and that he couldn't defend it. He spoke about attitude, and he also spoke about complacency, that the performance was lackadaisical, lazy, not good enough, and the change of attitude was required in the dressing room. Now, all of these things, all of these things came out the mouth of Neil Lennon, so no one can say that, you know, I'm trying to throw a spanner in the works by suggesting that there's issues in the dressing room. These things were mentioned last night by Neil Lennon, so that's what I'll focus on.
Well, I think that's somebody that's at the end of his tether with some of the players. I think the players themselves have been inconsistent. Some of them have been inconsistent. Whether that's down to the positions they're playing, or the shape of the team, or a lack of confidence, or whatever. That old cliche about goals change games. We scored 2 quick goals last Sunday, and we looked for half an hour like a kind of world-beating team. Because once you go ahead in a game, you run that bit faster, you're that bit more confident. But we seem to go through, over a lot of games this season where we've lost the first goal, you're on the back foot straight away. And because it's such a momentous season, the pressure before every game is immense. And then during the game, if you lose the first goal, that just intensifies as well. And it takes a special kind of player, I think, to deal with that. And that's why I think we've got a big squad. And what we've said all season, and maybe we're starting to change our opinion on this, that we've got the best squad of players in the country. I don't think we do have that at the moment. I think a few weeks ago we'd have said, if you look at our Glasgow rivals, how many of them we get in our team? I think that's now switched to say, on current form, how many of our guys would get in their team. So that's a concern. And the fact that they're playing so well, that adds to the pressure. Maybe in a different season they'd have dropped a bit more points and it wouldn't be as serious as it is, because we can't afford to drop any more points. And it's whether fans feel confident enough going into Sunday. That was a lot. I think it was 13 negative things he said there, wasn't it?
Yeah.
13 negative things. So I think he's in.
And that was in a minute and a half.
Aye. So goodness knows what he said to the players if he said that in front of the media. I think it's been difficult to get some of that squad into the team because I'm not sure that he trusts them, not because they're not good players, but because there's no evidence that they can hack it when this having to win these games come on. That's why, going back to Europe there, that I would have played these fringe players to see what they can do. I'd have played Turnbull and Sorrell and Klimala and even young Dembele, because I'd have used Europe as a chance to see what they can do. So when you have to call on them, you've got some sort of confidence that they can do what you want them to do. I was really surprised at that many negative things. And that's an indication that I think it's going as low as it's possibly been. I think you mentioned the Glasgow derby or losing the goals in Aberdeen. They weren't as low as last night, because last night, as I said, in that last 15 minutes, it went from a poor result to an embarrassing result. And I think Lenny said himself in other parts of the media talk that, you know, he's been at Celtic for the best part of 20 years, and that was like, you know, one of the worst, if not the worst result. So that's a hard one to come back from. From my point of view, I think there's far more risk in having to twist. I would certainly stick. But because we're not playing particularly well, because we've only won 1 in 6, every game becomes a massive game, and all we do is we pile more and more pressure on ourselves. And we have to get to some point that we have a decent run to try and ease that pressure. And all I would do, that again, the old football cliche is you take one game at a time. Let's go to Sunday, let's do what we can, and let's get the points, let's go up the road. But if we don't get the points, again, that's a different discussion. But
I was going to ask, how long do you leave that? Because I was speaking to Kevin Graham. Kevin obviously has appeared on a Celtic State of Mind from the very first episode and is a regular part of the team. And, I asked the question, you can't just hope that it gets better, and there's no signs, Jim. This is the problem I've got. There's no signs that it will. Now, one of the things I kind of pitched to you as well, when I was talking to Anthony Haggerty just the other week there, we spoke about losing the dressing room. What does that actually mean? And who's to say that anyone's lost a dressing room? We're not part of that inner sanctum. So who are we to say that someone's lost the dressing room? So another way to look at that would be, right, against Ferencvaros, Neil Lennon comes out and he speaks about certain players wanting away from the club. Who would those players be? Could it be Ryan Christie, who hasn't signed a new contract? Could it be Christopher Ayer, who there's been interest from AC Milan? Could it be Eduard, who Neil Lennon has specifically spoken about in terms of telling him just to get on with it, and that's the way it's going to be till the end of the season, potentially January now? Or could it be in Cham, where there was actual interest in the last transfer window? So there's 4 players who he might have been referring to. And again, I'm speculating on that based on the evidence. You then look at the 6 players that Lenny's brought in the last transfer window. You've got Barkas. Is he happy sitting on the bench last night? I don't think so. You've got Turnbull. Is he happy that he's barely kicked a ball? I doubt it very much. El Yunusi, will come back to the issues in relation to his mobile phone, which I think have been blown out of proportion. But he didn't look happy when he was walking off the pitch. You've got a Yeti, who hasn't played 2 full games in a row. You've got Duffy, who's in the worst form of his life. And you've got Laxalt, who is the only kind of chink of light in terms of the new signings. So you've got 6 new signings. You've got 4 guys who may have been referred to after the Ferencvaros game. Potentially you've got 9 players. Now, 9 players are unhappy.
Possibly unhappy.
Possibly unhappy for not getting a game after having, come here for £4.5 million. I'm pretty sure Barkas won't be very happy. Or some of the guys who are agitating for a move, according to Neil Lennon after the Ferencvaros game. You're then looking at 9 players who might not be happy. And I think that is what you would call losing the dressing room.
I wouldn't go quite that far. I think you're looking for players to have their own self-motivation at the end of the day. Another thing is some of the players that are missing as well. If you're talking about consistent performers, there's no better than the last season in Big Julian at the back in Forrest. And we're definitely missing Forrest. Now, what Forrest gives you is goals and loads of assists. You're never going to get that from Jeremy Frimpong. And it's a kind of strange one with Frimpong because he's not a right back and a back 4. And he's not a wing back because he can't defend, and he's not forward. So I'm not exactly sure what we have in that side of the pitch, but we're definitely missing Forrest. In terms of players being unhappy, in terms of players wanting to leave, I'd imagine that Celtic is going to be a stepping stone for most players. Most players will want to leave, it's just a matter of timing. I'm not so sure that all these players are unhappy at the same time. The big disappointment this year has been Eddie. I don't think, personally again, that we've played the best team. How did we win the league last year? League efforts. You said a few weeks ago you thought the turning point was Lille in the first half, and I said a few weeks before that the turning point was League efforts. Coming off the bench at St Johnstone and winning us the game that day. Because a fit Lee Griffiths, physically and mentally, for me, he's the first name in the team sheet. Now, he's come off the bench every time and he's scored. He's come off the bench and he's been lively and he makes other players play as well. But what was dead interesting last night was the comments from Sutton when he was absolutely scathing on Lee Griffiths. Now, does he know something that we don't know in terms of his fitness? Because when he said to Darryl Curry, look at the state of him, and I'm thinking, what do I know? He looks all right to me. So maybe Chris Sutton knows a bit more than we do. Now, Lee's only started the one game against AC Milan, and he only had 45 minutes. So was that tactically, or was that lack of fitness? Neil Lennon doesn't usually make substitutes at half-time, so that was kind of unusual to do in terms of taking Lee off. But Lee has to be a starter, and you have to play him with Eddie. And Eddie, to me, looks like a lost soul on his own. You know, he's 2 or 3 guys surrounding him. he's trying to beat too many players at times. There was one incident last night where I think he beat 2 or 3 and then just kept trying to beat 4 and 5. He looks a bit isolated, disinterested, although that's his body language at the best of times. So I think if you pair Eddie and Lee up front, that's the start of things. Even if you only get 45 minutes out of Lee Griffiths, that's the start. Get defenders to defend. Maybe it's time to bring Greg Taylor back and maybe play Laxalt further up the park. Play El Hamid at fullback rather than Frimpong. I think you need to stick with Duffy and Beaton at the moment until Ayer's fit. So just defend. You're going to bring Barkas back anyway, I think. So he'll be happy then once he gets brought back in. If you play football at that level, you have to take...
And then Scott Bain will be unhappy.
Well... I think if you've got a big squad of players, I think that comes with the territory. I think you have to be big enough to take that. And that's what disappoints me when you see players being visibly disappointed in certain things. You have to be bigger than that. When players are interviewed after the game and they've scored a hat-trick, they'll say, well, the main thing was the 3 points. It's not about me, type of thing. So you have to believe that. But we know ourselves. I mean, you've played football. You know what it's like. You don't want to be sub. If you're sub, you want somebody to do badly, so you get on. You're not bothered about, winning games. I'd imagine most football players are pretty selfish because they want a game. They want to score goals. They want their bonuses. They want all that kind of stuff. And going for the 10 is a local thing to us. Is Eddie that bothered about the 10? I'm thinking, no, that bothered. Is Eli Nusi? I don't think he's bothered about that at all. Who are the guys that are bothered about the 10? Duffy's bothered. Scott Brown's bothered. Callum McGregor's bothered. Forrest is bothered. We need that extra. You said in previous weeks that this could be a really tight league. If you go down to a point, a goal. So we can't afford to drop anything. We need everyone up for all the games. If there are 9 players who are not given their all, then that's a big concern. And it would take a very bold manager not to play those 9 players. And that's why Sunday will be interesting, because given what Neil said after the game, that sounds like loads of changes, but there's a big danger there that if you make too many changes, you're going to disrupt the whole thing. And we're playing a Motherwell team who are on a good run. I mean, they had a slow start to the season, but they've won 4 out of the last 5 games. And the game they lost, the other team got 2 penalties. So they'll fancy their chances. And the same way Aberdeen fancied their chances when we were up to Pittodrie a few weeks ago. So I think they'll be up for it. I think they'll come at us. So maybe that might help us in some way. But it'll be a tough game. And Sunday we'll do well to get 3 points. But we get the 3 points and we move on, and we try and get better as we go, and we try and find our best team, our best formation, our best shape, and go on some sort of run. And just keep on their coattails. As long as we don't drop any more than the 3 points that we've dropped, so the differential between ourselves and the league leaders, just keep on their tails. Don't think too far ahead. Don't think to the New Year's Day game at Ibrox or anything like that. We've got 27 games to go, something like that. There's tons of games if we manage to complete all the games. 27 games is a lot of games to play. We've got good players. Find the formation, find your best team, make the right substitutions, do all the things right. Your question would be, is the manager capable of doing that, given the evidence of this season? And I think it's a fair question to ask. But I think he's turned around in the past. And I think I said earlier, if I'm Neil Lennon and I've only really dropped 3 points compared to my rivals, and I've got reasons, not excuses, why we dropped those 3 points, it'd be very unfair to sack me, I think. And if you want to sack me because of performances, then I'm in the wrong game, because it's a results-driven business. Put points on the board. And I'm not trying to sugarcoat anything that happened last night. Last night was just unacceptable. It was abject. It was miserable. The only positive is it was in Europe. And for me, Europe doesn't count this year. You'd like to put in a performance. You'd like to get a result. But at the end of the day, Europe doesn't really matter. If we lose 4-1 on Sunday, that's a different conversation altogether. But I don't think we'll lose 4-1 on Sunday.
The view that I have on Europe this season is, how far would you go even if it was classed as a reasonable performance in Europe? Well, compare it to last season where you top your group and you only get an extra 2 games. You get one more round out of it, right? But the view that I was taking on Europe was the victory against Aberdeen in many ways was due to the momentum, the buoyancy, whatever you want to call it, that was generated by the Lille performance. We're now moving into Motherwell, which is a must-win game at this stage of the game, and we don't really know how that's going to go due to abysmal performance last night. So it's not a light switch where we can just say, right guys, switch off from last night, we move on to Motherwell and we're going to be the real Celtic, we're going to perform well this time.
And that's why I think you would say we need to make a lot of changes, because what happened last night was unacceptable. Therefore, who are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 players that let us down last night, and make it known in no uncertain terms that wasn't good enough, you're not playing on Sunday. If what you say has got some semblance of truth about players being unhappy, some of them will not be bothered. Fine, I'm not bothered. You leave me out if you want. So we need people, I mean, it's another cliche, but people who want to fight for the jersey. And maybe we don't have enough of those in the team that we maybe had 2 or 3 years ago. Guys like Big Lustig, Kieran Tierney, guys who maybe come to, maybe we don't have that. Then you look at Laxalt and you think, he's playing for the jersey, he's getting stuck in. So, as I've said before, I think a football manager is far more complex than we think it is, because you've got a squad of 28 young guys who all get, different views, different incentives, try to keep all them happy. Difficult job. I wouldn't envy Neil Lennon that. And when you have a run of results like this, that just intensifies the pressure. Sunday will be difficult. I'd imagine they'll make maybe 4, maybe 5 changes for Sunday.
And that in itself has its dangers, doesn't it? When you're trying to assemble some kind of fluidity within a team, so that we can go on a run of games.
What you're then doing is actually you're just saying, I'm going to roll the dice. This is it. This is, stick or twist for his point of view.
It certainly is, Jim.
If you look at the game last night, I think Barkas has to come back. I think we have to play a defender instead of Jeremy Frimpong. So El Hamid comes back for me. Maybe this is the game to play Turnbull, to show what we can do. Maybe we give Big Tom a rest after a couple of games, and you play Lee Griffiths up front. So there's 4 without thinking. Maybe you play Taylor at left back, you push Laxalt in the midfield and drop somebody. There's loads of permutations. In actual fact, sometimes when you have so many permutations, that makes it even more difficult. Because in the past, through my age here, if you go back to 83 when Dundee United won the league, I think it's 14 players played all season. Tight, knitted bunch of players, played every week, knew what they were doing, no changes. If you've got 28 players to pick from, you've got loads of different permutations in there. And unfortunately, I think it would be fair to say that he has not managed to find the right permutation yet. And therein lies the Pepsi challenge for this year, to find the best permutation. And I think, again, to me, and again, this is just a kind of enthusiastic amateur fan looking at it, if we play one up with Edward, we're not going to score a lot of goals. And we've got defence who are not playing too well, they're going to lose goals. So if we're going to lose goals, not score too many goals, I think we're in trouble. So the first thing you do is get 2 up front. Particularly in Scotland, I think there's a vast difference in quality between the Scottish League and most other European leagues. You saw that last night. And that's a very ordinary run-of-the-mill Sparta team. But technically, and like tactically, they were well ahead of us.
But then we go over to Lille and we draw 2-2. A big part of that was the injury to Ayer. Well, I'm saying it is, because I think that was a turning point in the game. We're 2-0 up, Ayer goes off. And we go toe-to-toe with Lille. Jim, they go out and hammer a very, very good AC Milan team last night. So sometimes we can say that when it suits the performance that we've just had. I mean, last season we wouldn't be saying that after we beat Lazio at home and away. And the standard of Scottish football hasn't dramatically changed since last season. So I think it comes down to the team and the performance last night. Now, part of that team is Neil Lennon, because he's put the team out. He's then failed to react to the fact that it was not working in the first half. Anyone could see that. The commentators seen it after 20 minutes. Half time, I'm screaming for changes. The changes come just before the hour mark. And I just think there's a trend developing there. You're right in what you say, Motherwell. You're talking about stick or twist for Neil Lennon. If we go into the Motherwell game with the same kind of lack of impetus, because that's a word that's been used also, talking about last night, Robinson will have a very organised and aggressive side waiting for Neil Lennon. I rate him as a manager. I think he's one of the finest managers in the league. I'm surprised he's still there. He's probably... he probably should have left a year or 18 months ago. I fear that if you stay too long, sometimes it turns into the Tommy Wright territory, and you take it to a level. Scott Brown, also, we've mentioned Neil Lennon's comments. Scott Brown, I feel, made some very interesting comments. I'm going to come back to, in particular, the culture one that Lenny made earlier on. But Scott Brown said, we've not hit those standards yet for whatever reason. Now, he's the captain of the club. So, obviously, when he is putting his point across, you listen. I mean, he's the leader on the pitch. Now, that sounds to me like, and, you know, maybe I'm really analysing what's been getting said last night, for whatever reason. This is one of the issues. They don't know what the reasons are, therefore they can't sort it. He went on to say it wasn't a team performance tonight. It was a group of individuals. Again, that reeks of issues behind the scenes. If people are playing as individuals, Jim, it goes back to some of the language used by Neil Lennon against Ferencvaros, talking about people looking for moves.
Well,
this concerns me.
Was Neil Lennon also said the words playing as individuals, so they've both said the same thing in terms of players playing as individuals. So you then ask, who are the players that are playing as individuals? Elyounoussis one. I think I'm not having a witch hunt on him, but I think he's certainly one because, you know, again last night, invisible. Not the only one last night, invisible. Who else is playing as individuals? Maybe Eddie's playing as an individual. Because, as I said, there was a time where... Based on last night,
yeah.
He's playing as an individual. Apart from that, I'm struggling to see... I mean, you can say Ryan Christie, but I think he's been our best player. So if that's him as an individual...
it's part of his game. It's part of his game.
Keep it going, that's what he does. And if he didn't play as an individual, he wouldn't have scored the goal he scored last Sunday. So, you know, I think that's okay. So, again, we're having to comment on something, but we don't know the full story behind it. As you know yourself, words are very important, and what words you use. And I think you said earlier that Neil talked about, you know, having to change the culture, and I thought he meant attitude, and then later on he said attitude, and I think he means attitude. And again, because we don't know the story, which players are not showing the right attitude, which players are playing as individuals, that's the manager's job to solve the problem. He seems to have identified the problem, which is the first thing you have to do, and it's up to him to solve the problem. So, for example, if we don't win on Sunday and Neil comes out and says the exact same thing, then he's not solved the problem. And if you don't solve the problems, then it's inevitable what's going to happen next, because you can't solve the problems. And I'd imagine he'd be the first to put his hands up then to say, look, everyone's playing as individuals every single game, and I can't solve the problem. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but he's identified the problem, go and sort the problem. And it's the fact we don't know who these players are. So everyone is going to speculate as to who's not got the right attitude, who's not doing what they're meant to be doing. And then actually, if you go a bit deeper than that and you say, well, why? Why are they not showing the right attitude, and why are they playing as individuals? Because if it's detrimental to the team, then that's not a good idea. So who would be intentionally doing that? And you find this is mind-boggling why somebody would intentionally do something to the detriment of the team.
Is that not modern football, Jim? Is that not player power? Because it's always the gaffer that gets the sack. You know, that we can't ship out 20 players. And this is the way, if there is unrest, and I'm basing that on what's been said particularly after the Ferencvaros game and then after last night's game, where there are people playing as individuals or agitating for a move, or, you know, all of these things, attitude, culture, all Neil Lennon's words, not my words. If that is the issue, it's going to end one way. It's going to end one way. Now you say
it's going to end one way unless he sorts it out. So, say for instance, again, just speculating, say Eddie's one of those players, then you have to leave him out. You have to drop Eddie. And for lots of people, they might be thinking, "What are you doing dropping Eddie? He's your talisman." But if he's the one with the attitude, if he's the one that wants to play as an individual, then if you're the manager, you have to stamp your authority on the team to say, you know, you're playing as an individual, Eddie. Your attitude's poor, you're on the bench. Now, Eddie may not be bothered because Eddie will be away next year anyway. So, I think you're right about the modern player. And that's why maybe you need more younger, hungrier players. And that's when maybe if Turnbull plays, maybe you'll get that hunger. And that's what that team had last night. A lot of young guys in their team. Lots of hunger. Lots of desire. Stuck to their game plan. And you can see actually, every goal they scored, the goalkeeper went out the pitch to celebrate with them.
I did notice that actually. Now, you mentioned stuck to the game plan. Again, after a performance like that, I sometimes wonder what our game plan is. Talking about, give him if he's identified that there's an issue, give him an opportunity to resolve it. But he identified it when we were bounced out of the Champions League. That was several weeks ago. We're now more or less out of the Europa League because we're not going to pull this one round after 1 point in 3 games. He's already identified it weeks ago and it's not been sorted out. And I think this was what I was trying to ask Kevin last night. How long do you give him? Because we could be sitting here next week and if we don't win against Motherwell, I think the decision comes out in Neil Lennon's hands.
I think if we don't win against Motherwell, then that's a whole different conversation. If we keep putting 3 points on the board, irrespective of how poorly we play, I don't think that's a conversation. But because of the enormity of this season, and because we've dropped some points already, the pressure's on. So we really can't afford to drop any more. Even if we play great on Sunday, even if we go out there and we batter them for 90 minutes and lose a daft goal in the last minute, or we 1 up and we lose a goal to have a 1-1 draw, we can't afford to drop any more points. And I think you're right in terms of what would happen next, whether it's Lenny's own choice or it's taken out of his hands. I think something would certainly happen then. But it's not happened. So that's why I say that I think we move on to the next game. We get our best team in the park. We get some sort of shape about them. We get some sort of decent performance out of all the players. They don't play as individuals. Their attitude is better. And that's down to the manager again. But you'd also like to think that the players have some sort of... They want to show a better attitude. But, as you say, that's a modern player. What have you got to lose? They may be out the team next week. Who cares? They still get paid. Doesn't matter. Another thing I thought of watching the game last night, again, which I felt after the transfer window, because I thought it was a brilliant transfer window in terms of we didn't lose any players and we signed a whole lot of players. But what I was hoping we'd sign would be somebody big up front, a big 6'4" target man to mix things up, because we don't mix things up. So without any high balls in the box, it's a waste of time. I'm not saying we should sign John Dykes or anything like that, because I don't think he's good enough. And a big lad, even Tony, they wanted 10 million, so that was never going to happen. I just thought if we'd have signed somebody
it's
big...
a shame it didn't happen, actually, when you see the start of the season. Well. I know.
But, so, I don't blame the club for lots of things that say, well, we should have signed this guy and Foster shouldn't be allowed to. There's lots of things that were out with our hands that we couldn't control. And Ivan Toney, would have been a great signing, but we wouldn't have going to pay 10 million. We're never going to pay £10 million. And that's fine by me. But maybe we should have got somebody that maybe offered something a bit different to try and mix up with it, because we're dead samey. I think our 4 forwards are all, there's a kind of sameness about them. I
think even the suggestion of some of the players you mentioned, and obviously the other one of that ilk that had been mentioned during that period was Stephen Fletcher, and I'm not suggesting that we should have signed him, but every time these guys were mentioned, maybe with the exception of Ivan Toney, Celtic fans weren't really interested in that. I mean, we were scoffing at the suggestion that we could possibly sign somebody like Lyndon Dykes, for example, who incidentally has gone down south and is getting a game every week and playing really well. Yeah. But that change of approach that you're referring to there, Jim, I don't think it was popular, when we're talking about that type of player at that time.
But I think when you're building a squad, you have to have options, and we're severely limited in the options. And we let Marian Shved go out on loan, and by all accounts, he hasn't learned the language and doesn't put a shift in the training and all that sort of stuff. But the one time we saw him, he scored this fantastic goal in the European qualifiers last year. And you think, well, maybe there's a player in there. I'm not saying Shved's the answer. I'm not saying that at all. But if James Forrest is out of the team, we don't have somebody who can slot in and do what James Forrest does. And I think like a lot of things that, that he's a kind of somebody the fans, get on his back quite a lot. And then you see when he's out, how much we miss him.
We miss him, yeah.
Same with Big Joe at the back. And down the left, we don't have a Jamesy Forrest type player down there. Mikey Johnson is possibly somebody who can come in and do something. So in terms of variation, we don't have tricky wingers who can beat a man. And that's, in modern football, it's all about taking a man out of the game. Tiger does that quite well when he bursts forward. If you don't take a man out of the game, particularly in Scotland, there's still like 7, 8, 9 players behind the ball. So we need players who can get to the byline. A Yeti, if you're going to play a Yeti, we need players who can give him chances, because he's a kind of 10, 6-yard player. He'll score goals then, but if you're not putting decent balls into him, he's never going to score. Eddie's different. Eddie kind of comes deep, picks the ball up. Griff does something similar to that as well. But there's a kind of sameness to those four forwards. And I think you have to kind of mix things up if things aren't going particularly well. So I find that an issue, that we can't mix things up. Anyway, so I'm just waffling there.
Not at all. Sean is commenting on YouTube, and I'll dip in and out, obviously, as we always do, Jim, into the comments. There's a lot of comments coming through after last night's performance. There must have been a record amount of blocks on Rangers fans last night. I've got to say, we're talking dozens and dozens every single broadcast. But Sean, you mentioned the disgraceful and embarrassing result and performance last night. Lennon's post-match was equally as embarrassing, yet again deflecting and blaming the players. I think he did deflect a fair bit against his own deficiencies last night. I think he done the same against after the Ferencvaros result. And if you're going to try and change a culture, you need the buy-in of your people, you need the buy-in of your workforce. Everybody's got to buy it into it because the culture won't change otherwise. And I don't think that's the way to get the buy-in of your people, Jim, to throw them under the bus like that. You're looking for some form of unity. You're looking for everybody to be pulling in the same direction. That is what a culture is. You know, well, and by the way, you don't change a culture in 3 days.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll kind of... last season we looked at the team across the city and on social media all the time was that's him chucked his players under the bus again. And that was a regular thing because they were losing lots of games and it was the player this, the player that, we couldn't defend under the bus. I think you're right. I think if you're a manager then it's your fault. Even if it's not your fault, it's your fault. And what you say in public is a lot different from what you say in private. But I just still think it's such a difficult balance now. So say for instance, you know, go back to Eddie again. Say Eddie was the cause of it. And Lenny comes out and says, Eddie's a problem, he's getting sold in January, that's it finished. How would the other players react to that? You know, they might react quite negatively towards that. Because they like Eddie, Eddie's a good guy now. So that makes it worse. So I just think it's a difficult situation that he's in. I think when you get in a situation like that, not saying very much is quite a good thing to do, rather than saying too much. I just hope he knows what he's doing. I just hope that he knows what the solution is. He knows what the problem is. I just hope he knows what the solution is. I hope he implements the solution as quick as possible. I hope it works out for everyone's sake. Because no one wants Lenny to fail. I mean, Lenny's an iconic figure. You know, he's been there for the best part of 20 years. He is a legend. And you wouldn't want him to spoil that legacy. Back in March, you know, no one would be saying, let's get rid of Lenny. And even people who've said that, you know, I didn't like Lenny getting the job in the first place. What were people saying last March? Brilliant football, treble, this is great, we love it, whatever. Now we're saying, well, Lenny out, we never wanted him in the first place. I think you have to be not so fickle, not so inconsistent, try and be consistent about things. At the time, I thought, given that he came in at short notice, he got us over the line, he was there for 2.5, 3 months, got us over the line, won us the cup, did the treble. I think if I was Neil Lennon, I'd feel I'd done enough to get the job. Lots of people didn't think he should get the job. I think how he got the job, how it was announced, wasn't that clever by the chief executive. Didn't think that was very clever at all. Last year, he put a lot of points on the board in the first half of the season, and he put tons of points in the second half of the season where the other team crumbled. So I don't think anyone was clamouring for Lenny to go back in March. So I think he deserves, you know, a wee bit of time to try and turn this around. Albeit there's been some huge disappointments this season. In the big games, there's been disappointments, none more so than the Ferencvaros game and the Glasgow Derby. Albeit I thought they played well in the Ferencvaros game. The second half of the Glasgow Derby was unacceptable. Bits of last night were unacceptable. Because I think it's dead easy to have a knee-jerk reaction to say that was an embarrassing performance last night. I don't think it was an embarrassing performance, it was a poor performance. An embarrassing result. What happened in the last 15 minutes was quite embarrassing. So there's a lot to be done, and the person that knows that himself is Neil Lennon, and you would like to think his backroom staff are helping him, and that's another thing. We don't know what the backroom staff do, what kind of contribution they make, and people guess maybe he should be doing more. It's interesting. Neil said body language again. I think for the first time, because I think that's a thing that's been in social media quite a lot about Neil's body language.
Mm-hmm.
And he's almost kind of turned that on its head by saying the player's body language. And then, certainly you've said in the past, well, you're not a psychologist, you're not a body language expert, so maybe we shouldn't talk about that. So why is Neil mentioning body language. I thought that was a wee bit strange last night to mention that. But if he knows what the problem is, it's up to him to solve the problem. And let's hope he does that on Sunday.
No, you're right. There may well be body language experts tuning into the broadcast, Jim, but I think when someone who is so identifiable by his persona, his demeanour, his body language, as Neil Lennon has been as a manager at Celtic, it's noticeable when there's such a change in that approach. And I think there has been a massive change in that approach this season. He returned to maybe the Lenny that we recognised against Lille. He was animated, he kicked every ball against Aberdeen. But then again, it takes, for me, a whole run of games where everybody's in it together and everybody's pulling together. And it just seems very stop-start to me. We've hit a brick wall again last night.
I think you're right. I mean, until we go in a 4-5-6 game winning run, and I'm not including Europe in that, from a domestic point of view, league games, if we go 4-5-6 league games, winning the games, then hopefully we're back on track. If that doesn't happen, then winning the league becomes a bit more uncertain. So I think he certainly deserves the chance to go and achieve that.
You said becomes more uncertain. How certain are you that Celtic will win the league this season at this moment in time?
Well, I think there's two factors here. We're not playing particularly well, and the team across the city are playing really well. And up until maybe 4 or 5 weeks ago, I think there was a kind of feeling amongst the Celtic fans that they will chuck it at some point. They're not that good. They wouldn't get into your team. I watched the Benfica game last night, and okay, they were playing against 10 men for about 70 minutes of the game, but they completely bossed Benfica. They bossed the game. They could have scored 4, 5, 6 goals. They could have chucked away in the last 10 minutes, but they're a good team, and they're setting the benchmark this year, unfortunately. In any other season, they may have dropped a few points by now. And if they had dropped a few points, it maybe not make our situation look as bad. So we've got two issues here. One, we're not playing as well as we should be doing. We haven't dropped a lot of points compared to them. It's only the 3 points. It was down to the one game. But they're looking pretty strong. And if they keep playing the way they're playing, it puts even more pressure on us to try and put points on the board. And it's amplifying our situation, the fact that they're playing so well. If they hit some sort of rut and they start dropping a bit some points, even though we're not playing that well, if we put points on the board, then the supporters will be a bit happier. I think it annoys me about a lot of this stuff is, if you go back a few weeks where they dropped a few points and people will say, well, if we win the Glasgow Derby, then we'll be 5 points ahead. You shouldn't look too far ahead, because things can change very, very quickly in football. And that's why all our concentration should be this Sunday. All Neil's concentration should be this Sunday. And he knows it himself. We're not telling him anything he doesn't know himself. Getting that best team out there. Lee has to start. And if Lee can't start because of something that we don't know about, I'd be really concerned about that.
Let's talk about Lee Griffiths, actually, because obviously there were quite a few comments after the game, particularly from Chris Sutton, ex-Celt and ex-teammate of Neil Lennon. Before I do that, Baza is commenting on Twitter to say that Lennon has lost the dressing room just like he did at Hibs. He must go now. Now, we have spoke about this term, losing the dressing room, and I think the way I understand it is if you do have half a dozen new people coming in, bedding into a side, not getting a game, they're probably going to be unhappy. And then the players that Lennon was potentially referring to as being unhappy after the Ferencváros game, then you have a group of players who might be unhappy. Is that losing the dressing room? Mutiny in the camp? These are things that, if you say it with absolutely no context, Jim, then people might say that you're the agitator, that I'm the agitator. But I'm referring to comments made by Neil Lennon last night and after his game against Ferencváros. It would appear that all actually is not well, and that's come from the gaffer's mouth. Now, Kevin Malley makes an interesting point. You're commenting on YouTube, and for everybody who's actually watching on YouTube, make sure that you subscribe on there, because we are broadcasting on a daily basis. And on match day, we go out 4 or 5 times, and we might even go out on another broadcast with Jim Orr after this one, if he's up for it. Now, Kevin Malley isn't buying that Milan, Lille and Sparta are miles ahead of us. We topped our group last year. Players are not playing for Neil for whatever reason, and that's the bottom line. And I think that goes back to the previous comment about, you know, losing our dressing room is one way to put it, Jim. Not playing for the manager, it's the same thing. If that is the case, Neil Lennon's not turning this around.
Well, at the moment I'm looking at Sky, and it's the manager of the team across the city. And back in March or February, March, they were saying he's lost his dressing room. So he's got the dressing room back now because they're playing really well. So you can recover from the phrase losing the dressing room, because I'm not sure what that means. Again, it could be one player who could be agitating and winding other players up. Who knows? And that's the thing about, we love to speculate as fans that don't really know what's happening at that level, because we've never been involved at that kind of level, so who knows what's happening. I think the point you made earlier is really valid about the modern player. It requires a really good skill set for a manager to try and manage that. What would Jock Stein make of these players? He's finding it incredibly difficult. So I think that's really difficult. As I said, I don't envy Lenny having to do that. He'll know what the problems are, as I said earlier. I keep repeating myself here. It's up to him to solve the problems. To me, it's just dead simple.
One of the
problems. To know what the
problems
are, solve the problems.
One of the problems, and again, this isn't down to speculation in relation to their attitude or whether or not they want to be here. One of the problems for me, based on several performances, and in actual fact most of the performances since he arrived, is Shane Duffy. Now, we brought in Shane Duffy. He was the messiah, Jim. He came in to shore up the defence, to lead us to the 10, and let's be honest, these performances have not been anywhere near good enough. And yet again, last night, you're looking at some fundamental defensive errors.
Well, I said before we came on here that I thought he was okay last night, Shane Duffy. He wasn't the worst last night. And people might look at the third goal, but it was a great bit of skill by the guy. The guy just left him for dead. I wouldn't have blamed Shane Duffy for that. He's not played as well as we'd like him to play. I think I said last week, he's like one of the guys where the 10 means so much to him. And maybe he's into every game with that on his shoulder that we have to win. I can't make mistakes. And the thing about a defender can't make mistakes. If you mow Elyounoussi without having to go to him again, he had a chance last night and he missed it. You know, if Duffy makes a mistake, we're going to lose a goal. I think there's lots of mitigating factors about Shane Duffy in terms of, and we've covered him in previous weeks, in terms of he's not played a lot of football, he's having 3 games a week. He's possibly found the standard up here much better than he thought, because I think Scottish football's a bit of a joke down in England, thinking I'll go up there and just stroll through the games, and he hasn't been strolling through the games, and people have made it difficult for him. So he could be playing better, absolutely, but at this point in time, I think we have to keep playing Shane Duffy. Don't even leave Shane Duffy out. When Big Julian comes back, maybe that's a choice that Lenny has to make. But I would tend to keep playing him so that he can hopefully play through this. And again, the thing about fans and social media, I mean, it was like a campaign to get Shane Duffy. You know, day after day after day, get Shane for the 10, all this kind of stuff. So we, the fans, not me because I didn't really know much about Shane Duffy, but loads of people were clamouring for Shane Duffy, get Shane Duffy, get Shane Duffy. So we signed Shane Duffy, and then we said, why did we sign Shane Duffy? You know, so you can't be inconsistent.
I wanted Benkovic, just for the record.
Noted.
For the benefit of the tape. But anyway, Shane Duffy is here. He is here certainly until the end of the season. He is on big wages. He's not performing. So there's a decision to be made by Neil Lennon. Very much like a decision on the goalie for Sunday, a decision on whether to play 2 up front, whether to revert back to 3 at the back. I've seen quite a lot of names mentioned, Jim, in relation to who should replace Neil Lennon. Well, Neil Lennon's in charge at the moment, but I have seen quite a lot of names mentioned because people are saying, well, if he goes, who on earth do you expect to come in? And that's almost like, let's not make the change just in case, you know, we can't get... There is succession planning in every business. Every large business, you know, survives on succession planning. Now, some might say that Celtic aren't great at that in recent years, but if a decision's made, it's because there's a plan in place.
I think that's a difficult one because of the jungle drums in football. So if Celtic, for the sake of discussion, have sounded someone out and that gets out, that totally undermines Neil Lennon's position. And if he turns it round, if you're Neil Lennon, you think they're going behind my back here. But I suppose he's been in the game long enough to know that that's the kind of things that happen. Again, I get back to stick or twist and the blind twist that you're going to get. And again, for the sake of discussion, I noticed on Twitter this morning, I don't know if it came from my bookmakers or somebody just made it up, but Eddie Howe's 11-10 favourite, and I've touched on Eddie Howe in a previous podcast. Where's the evidence that Eddie Howe's going to be such a good manager at Celtic Park? He went to Burnley and lasted 18 months. He's used to Bournemouth, that's what he liked. He's been sacked, he's not got another job yet. People saying I pay him the same wages as we paid Rodgers. You know, people have to take a wee step back, some of this stuff. If somebody said to me, we can get Roberto Martinez, as you mentioned last week, full-time, starting tomorrow, well, that's interesting. Rafa Benitez, well, that's interesting. Pochettino, that's interesting. But they're never going to come. And come the end of this season, once the season finishes, for good or for bad, if next season we're going for 11 in a row, or just the one, next year's a hard sell, I think. And I think Neil will go at the end of this season, no matter what. If he delivers the 10, you know, he'll be like lauded forever. If he doesn't do the 10, it's a huge disappointment. And I think either way, he'll go, and that's where your succession plan comes in just now. That we should be going somebody who's going to be there for the next 4 or 5 years. And I talked about Europe earlier, and Sutton, Chris Sutton was on last night saying about, you know, Celtic should always be doing this in Europe and that in Europe. I agree, but not this season. Not this season. Because interestingly, when you think of next, well, I think it's interesting. When you think of next season, whether we do the 10 or not, it doesn't really matter. If season 21-22, we're guaranteed 2 Championship League places, I don't care if we don't win the league, because we've got a Championship League place. I would like to go and watch good, attacking, entertaining football. And if we're second, we're second. I wouldn't be that bothered. As long as we get a Champions League place and a crack at the Champions League and a good run in Europe. Because if you said to me, what do you want? Do you want last 16 in the Champions League and being second or winning the league? I would take the last 16 in the Champions League. Because you get into the last 16 in the Champions League, how exciting must it have been to actually got there? What kind of scalps must you have taken to get there? And that's the big thing for me, because do you get excited about playing Hamilton Accies, Celtic Park, or St Johnstone, or Livingston? No, you don't. When you go, it's a football, and that's what you want to do, but is it something you look forward to? Is it exciting? No, it's not. So we are where we are in this league, and I've said before on your podcast, I think some sort of European league's the way forward. We want to play teams, this will sound a bit daft now, who are at the same level as us, like Sparta Prague, but not got to do. Right?
I think if you're only the second best team in Scotland, then it wouldn't be realistic to be getting into the last 16th of the Champions League. I think if you're only the second best team in Scotland, when the time comes, and it will come, where they're looking at a merger of sorts between various countries due to the financial situation, then you're not guaranteed to be invited to that as well. I just think the 10 and constantly being the best in the league. Yes, it's great to be in a Champions League, but you've got to win your league. You've got to win your league. And
that's why I said if you get top 2 in the league, is it
you've still got to win the league for me, Jim. Always got to win the league.
In the once upon a time, I think I've said this before in the podcast, is that you were excited by the football. It was exciting to watch. And I think a lot of these games in the last few years have been endured as opposed to being enjoyed, because there's so much at stake, and the 10 hovers above everything. Can't drop a point, can't play him because we can't trust him. Get the points, that's the most important thing. So enjoyment and excitement, I think, suffers because of that. If you're going to take risks, then you might lose points. If you lose points, you might lose the league. You lose the league, you're not in the Champions League, unless you have that safety net of a second place. And you could be a young, exciting, vibrant team with a young, exciting manager and maybe not win the league. You could do well in Europe, playing that kind of football. So, again, it depends what you want. I find it hard, as I said earlier, to get up for going to watch Hamilton on a cool Wednesday night. I'd rather play a bigger team. It doesn't have to be AC Milan, it could be Benfica or Sporting Lisbon or these kind of guys. I want to go in games where we're fairly evenly matched. And if we win the game, it's a big achievement. Is it a big achievement beating Hamilton? No, not given the size of Celtic Football Club. Is it a big achievement winning the league? Yeah, of course it's a big achievement. Anytime you win something, it's a big achievement. But how big an achievement is it? The 10 is a local thing. It doesn't go beyond our borders. It's about to say we've won 10 and you haven't won 10. Oh wait, we've won 2 9s. So 2 9s is better than only 1 9. And that's all it's about for me. And everything is focused on that. And once we get this season over, I think we get back to 0 in terms of what we do next with the club. I don't mean going for 1 in a row, but we go back to a position whereby the 10 is not suffocating things. And I think it's just suffocating everything. And I know we had Levine saying he was sick of it and he hoped the other guys won the league, which was a bizarre comment. The thing is, after this season, the 10's finished, one way or the other, will be finished. And the chances are it will never happen again. Although, we've said that twice in the past, that team wouldn't do 9 in a row, so who's to say it won't happen again. The quadruple treble is a phenomenal thing as well. When you think, I think you said the other day, but the odds of actually doing that would be far higher than winning 10 in a row. Because over the course of a season, the better team should win the league because they've got the better resources. So we've been the favourites to win the league, every single league. And if the favourite wins, then that's not that unexpected. But the cup, anything can happen. But I'm waffling again. But in summary, I think the 10 suffocates everything. And I think we have a new dawn next year. But that's next year. Up front, in our face is Sunday. And what we do on Sunday against, as I said, a Motherwell team that's playing really, really well just now and full of confidence. So it's got all the kind of ingredients of being a really exciting game on Sunday, and hopefully we can come out on top.
For me, the priority is the league, season on season on season. 10 in a row is a priority this season, and I've said all week, looking at the campaign realistically, Jim, because it is unrealistic to expect to win a treble, but we've done it. It's unrealistic to expect to win a quadruple treble, but we're 90 minutes away from doing that. It would be unrealistic to continue that and win a 5th treble in a row. I'll take it, but it would be unrealistic. So when I was looking realistically at this season, what do I expect? What do I want from Celtic? And I don't mean expect in an entitled way. I think we've got the squad to do it if managed and selected properly. It's 10 in a row every day of the week. It's a quadruple treble for me. Yeah, in particular after last night's performance, Europe is gone. But I do feel that the European games are important to the overall momentum of trying to get this run together that we're struggling to get together. Now, as we move on this season, I think that one of the biggest issues will be we'll leave it too late. And it's one of my biggest criticisms of Neil Lennon himself. He leaves things too late in games to make the changes, personnel or even shape. And my biggest fear is if we leave this any longer, the issues that we have isn't down to a loss of form, it isn't down to injuries solely, isn't down to illness solely. The wider issues is this culture, the culture that Neil Lennon spoke of last night, whether he meant to or not, because that was a bombshell for me. In order to change a culture in a dressing room, in a business, in a family, in any organisation, it's huge. You certainly don't do it between last night's game and Sunday against Motherwell. That's impossible. That doesn't happen. You've got organisations around the world spending tens of millions to embed a new culture into an organisation that can sometimes take years, or you make a massive change. And sometimes that change is what changes a culture. So when was the last time there was a change in culture at Celtic Park? Well, you can look at the 9 in a row, and you can look at Ronnie Deila coming in. There was a change in culture then. You can look at Brendan Rodgers coming in. There was another change in culture then. There was another change in culture when Neil Lennon came back in. But my question would be, was it a change for the better? At the moment, it's looking like it wasn't. Because when you think about the way that Ronnie Deila came in and started speaking about how disappointed he was in some of the condition of players, the 24-hour athlete, which was his mantra, coming into new diets, new specialists, and everybody knows senior pros kicked back against that, didn't they? And there was mutiny in the camp. And some of the guys that you would be looking at to be big players and leaders in the dressing room turned their back on the gaffer. Everybody knows it happened. It's, not a bombshell for me to say that. They didn't buy into Ronnie's culture by and large. A lot of the younger players did, and look at how it's improved them, and look how they're benefiting from it. Look at Chris Ayer, Ryan Christie, Kieran Tierney, Callum McGregor. Then Brendan Rodgers comes in and completely changes the culture, not just of the dressing room, but of the club. The one thing he got wrong was the performances in Europe. He's possibly getting it right now that he's moved on to another club with bigger budgets and everything else. There was another change in culture when Lennon came back, when Neil Lennon came back, and I don't think it's been a good change. Now, you can't blame that on the players. You can't blame the approach of the club and the culture on the players. Now, if it needs to change, a big part of that change in any organisation in the world, Jim, who's changed the culture of the business, a lot of heads roll. Now, you can't sack 20 players to change a culture.
I wouldn't disagree with anything you just said there, Paul, but if you go back to last season, from January to March, if there's a culture change, it wasn't shown on the pitch. Whatever they were doing to get the results, it wasn't shown on the pitch. They were playing great football, scoring lots of goals for fun, and that's with the Neil Lennon culture, if that's a phrase. Kevin was on the other day, I think, talking about an elite manager, that we've only ever appointed 2 elite managers, which is Brendan Rodgers and Martin O'Neill. Jock Stein became an elite manager, but wasn't an elite manager at the time. I think it's really difficult to attract an elite manager to Celtic Park. Next year has been year zero, no matter what happens. A Ronnie Dyler type figure might have been the solution next year. And going all in with that and giving the guy time. Ronnie felt under pressure because I think things were starting to slip. And obviously a bit embarrassed by losing that semi-final. But Ronnie kept the run going, again, because the 10 smothers everything. And I totally get the culture thing. And if things have happened in the interim between Rodgers jumping ship and where we are now, then yeah, you'd have to ask questions of why that's been allowed to happen. And that doesn't just stop with the manager, that stops with the coaching staff, and it stops with those that are higher up than they are. And I also think Lenny needs a wee bit of help from time to time. I mean, the bit about the COVID-2 last week, I mean, Lenny's having to answer questions on that. It should be nothing to do with him. And I think what they've done is basically say, Lenny's the manager, you deal with everything. And the PR coming at the club isn't that good. And these are all wee things, absolutely, but they chip away at you. If you're Neil Lennon having to deal with all this kind of stuff as well. But to stick to the point you asked there, if standards have been slipping, again, why are they slipping and who's doing something about it? And if they have slipped and nobody's doing anything about it, then maybe what we'll see on the park as a result of that. I think that's the point you're making. That's the end point of that. And if that was the case last year, were we winning games in spite of that? Is that the point? And then this year we haven't won games. Basically, this is now coming home to roost. But this is all speculation, because when Lenny came out with kind of like all guns firing the other last week, whenever it was, he was talking about points about what the players get in terms of information, in terms of tactics, in terms of what we're doing at training. So I think there's this common perception that Lenny just turns up, picks the team and goes up the road. I think that's not what happens. There's a lot more to it than that. We don't know what happens, but it's a lot more detailed than we think. And there's a lot of misinformation kicking about social media that you have to take with a pinch of salt. When you're losing games, or you're not winning games, if you're dropping points, then it's going to be open season. People are going to ask questions, and that comes with the territory. I thought it was unfair for the criticism he got when he was winning games, because you can't win then, basically. Unless you're playing perfect football, scoring lots of goals, and putting points on the boards, you're going to get criticised. And that's why I would think that some of the managers that get mentioned as potential replacements, if Lenny should ever go, are a lot of non-starters. And even if you bring in a big name, Rafa Benitez, whatever it is, Celtic is, I wouldn't call them a unique club, because that's just daft to call them a unique club, but there are unique factors if you take over Celtic. A very demanding fan base, for one. You can say that every supporters' fan base are demanding, but if Benitez was at Newcastle, they weren't expected to win every game. They pick up a point here and there, that was really good. But the manager of Celtic is under enormous pressure, and they're only ever 2 or 3 games away from a complete crisis. Now, they've only won 1 in 6. Another year's gone by, maybe that's a crisis time. But then you analyse what the 6 are. 3 of them are in Europe. And again, it's just my opinion, Europe doesn't matter. We lost to Glasgow Derby with half a team missing. We should have won at Pittodrie after coming back, showing a lot of character. And we lost a daft goal in the last minute with 6 players, could have taken a bit of more responsibility. I'm not trying to make excuses I just think there was genuine reasons why we lost the Glasgow derby. It was the worst performance of the season, certainly the second half. Unacceptable. But even when you add all the things we've said in the last hour or so, we're only 3 points worse off. We've only dropped 3 more points, the team at the top of the league, and we're in the Scottish Cup final to try and do a quadruple treble. And I'm not trying to gloss over anything. I'm not trying to sugarcoat anything. I'm not trying to be a happy clapper. But if you look at just pure results, points on the board, cup competitions, it's kind of okay. If you disregard everything else, disregard performances and poor performance in Europe, we've said out loud, we're not really bothered about Europe. We don't want to get embarrassed. We want to put in decent performances. But at the end of the day, I think not being in Europe will be a good thing. And I think when we go to Prague and we go to the San Siro, we don't take Ryan Christie, we don't take Edward, we don't take Griffiths, we don't take Brown, we don't take Kalmack, we don't take Barkas. They stay at home. Because why risk taking them out of the country when there's a global pandemic going on? Why play them in games where they could get injured or they could be fatigued? So from my point of view, we're out of Europe because of 2 things. One was the embarrassing score last night, and also Lille taking care of AC Milan. Those 2 means we're out of Europe. So let's just look at Europe now as to give some of the fringe players a game to see what they can do. If I take you back to the League Cup semi-final, was it 2 years ago or 3 years ago? Ryan Christie comes in because we think we had 2 injuries in the first half. So he never started the game. Whether he would have gone or not, who knows? But he comes on because of an injury and he scores a wonder goal, and that just kick-starts his whole career. And at this point in time, we're saying, even with Eddie in the team, Ryan Christie is our most important player. The most valuable player is Ryan Christie, because he kicked on from that. And who's to say that a David Turnbull can't do something like that come this Sunday? And he cements his place in the team, and he adds a whole new dimension to the team. Because that's what football's like. Things can change in a second.
It can. I just fear that when I look back on the previous 9 in a row that Celtic had, and you look at the 10th season, you could go through every defeat and draw and say, but if he had scored that penalty, and if that hadn't hit the post, and if such and such wasn't suspended for that game, and if that guy wasn't injured for that game, we would have won 10 in a row. We're getting into the realms of but, and I think that when you're looking at the overall performances, we've made reasoned arguments in relation to injuries, illnesses, dealing with ball and goalie gate. We've made as many reasoned defences and mitigation of the poor performances. And I just think now, 1 win in 6, Jim, we're going into Sunday's game. It's a must-win in November. It's a must-win against Motherwell. And it'll be a very interesting discussion between you and I, should we get any less than a win. One final thing before we go, because we did talk about it, and it's got a lot more traction than I expected it to get yesterday and today, Jim. Was El Yunusi. He looked gutted when he came off. You were talking about the 2 ends of the scale of his performance. You either get 2 wonder goals or you get last night. And last night was not one of his better games. So he trudges off and he looks unhappy. That never really bothers me when people are unhappy at getting taken off. If they were delighted to be getting taken off, that would bother me more. I mean, it wasn't quite Joe Miller against Aberdeen in the League Cup where he went on as a sub, came off as a sub and almost tore his shirt off. But so he's unhappy. He goes away and gets showered and dressed and everything else. He's sitting there in the stand, and just as the video camera goes over to him, he's checking something within his pocket on his phone. Now, when Neil Lennon was questioned about it, he was questioned twice on 2 different platforms. His response was, well, he better not have been. There's loads of reasons why he could have been checking his phone.
It was really unfair. It was really unfair.
I didn't think it was that bad.
I mean, Chris Sutton.
I thought he was OTT about
a complete meal of that. And then it was compounded by the BT interviewer asking Neil Lennon that question. It was a non-question. And what I said to you before going live today was any European game, if you're in the group stages of a European game and you're at Celtic Park watching the game, chances are people are checking their phone. Why are they checking their phone? To see the score in the other game. Right? And who knows what Moy was doing last night. If he was sitting back eating a bag of chips and having a pint of lager, different thing. But my take on it, he looked at his phone really quickly and he's possibly looking at the score in Milan. And it's not the score he'd have wanted, because we wanted Milan to win all their games and give us a chance to go for a winner-takes-all against Lille. So my reading of that is, about he looked at his phone, Lille are winning 2 or 3-0, oh, for goodness sake, and puts that away again. There was nothing to that. And I'd be astonished if, once Neil Lennon talked to him, that it's nothing more than that. And I thought it was really, really unfair of the BT person to ask that. Chris Sutton says I would fine him 2 weeks' wages. I mean, that's just kind of, as you said, OTT, and really, really unfair, without actually knowing what had happened. I just think it's nonsense.
Well, listen, I mean, I don't know El Younus's domestic situation. I don't know if he's got a partner and kids and where they are and where they're based, and he was maybe just double checking that one of his kids is away to bed. I don't know. At the end of the day, I didn't have an issue with it. You think back to Love Street 86, back in the good old days, Jim. How did Davy Provan know that it was 2 in the big famous picture? Because they had the trannies and all this kind of stuff. What's wrong with checking your phone? I don't have an issue with it.
Yeah, it's also the fact, I think the fact he didn't play very well. I mean, if it was last Thursday night and he came off after 75 minutes, you know, you'd be sitting...
They could have been sitting with a cigar and nobody would have questioned it.
Because he had a particularly poor game last night, and it's like, what is it? Our expectations of players, what we expect players to be like, it's just ridiculous. These are ordinary guys doing an extraordinary job. He's came off the park, he was disappointed, he didn't play particularly well. We're getting embarrassed by a pretty ordinary team. He's feeling pretty down about the whole thing. He looks at his phone for a few seconds. I just thought really, really unfair of Chris Sutton to say what he said. Really, really unfair of the BT people to ask Neil Lennon for a comment about that. But hey-ho.
I know. He might have been checking the time of the broadcast, because we have had current Celtic players joining us. So once again...
didn't text you last night, was that?
No, I didn't actually. But thank you everybody for joining us. It's been an interesting chat with Jim Orr, who is with us every Friday. Jim, you will be back next week, and we might even have another wee broadcast before you go home today. But all that's left for me to say is thank you everybody for joining us today on a Celtic State of Mind. We will be back with a live broadcast on Sunday, and we'll be putting out a podcast tomorrow. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Jim Orr, for joining us on a Celtic State of Mind.
Cheers, Paul.